You can't talk about the golden age of British trucking without tipping your cap to ERF. And yet somehow, it's the one name that's quietly slipped through the cracks. Everyone remembers Foden, everyone talks about Scania and Volvo. But ERF, that was the pride of Sandbach, a family-built machine that once took on the world and nearly won. Let's rewind the clock to 1933. Edwin Richard Foden, the man whose initials became the name of the brand, had just walked away from his role at Foden after a disagreement about the future of lorry design. Steam was on the way out. Diesel was clearly the future, but not everyone agreed, so Edwin did what any determined northerner would do. He started his own firm. ERF was born, and from day one, it was built on a vision of practical engineering, no-nonsense design, and rock-solid reliability. It didn't take long for hauliers to catch on. ERF trucks were simple, tough, and made for British roads. The company never tried to be flashy. It focused on building vehicles that could carry heavy loads across narrow lanes, steep hills, and grim weather without kicking up a fuss. They were known for using the best components from other manufacturers: Gardner engines, David Brown gearboxes, and Kirkstall axles. ERF was like the ultimate parts chef, mixing the best ingredients into something proper. And because it was family-run, there was pride behind the badge. This wasn't some faceless corporation, it was a tight-knit team from Cheshire who genuinely cared about the lorries they built. Mechanics loved working on them, drivers trusted them, fleet operators swore by them. Even school kids knew the badge: square, bold, and proudly British. There was a certain dignity in spotting an ERF on the motorway, knowing it wasn't mass-produced overseas but crafted right here in the UK. By the 1950s and 60s, ERF was booming. Their cabs had that classic upright stance with no frills but loads of visibility. The LV and KV series were everywhere: timber yards, tippers, long-haul runs, and heavy plant moves. They weren't glamorous, but they got the job done, and in haulage, that counts for more than chrome and cup holders. Farmers used them, builders loved them, and if you were hauling steel out of Sheffield in the pouring rain, you wanted an ERF under your boots. The 1970s brought in the B series, a bit more modern, still boxy, still no nonsense. Then came the C series with better comfort, improved interiors, and more streamlined looks. ERF even dabbled in export markets. Their trucks could be found working the docks in Australia, moving freight in South Africa, and pounding motorways across Europe. The little firm from Sandbach was punching well above its weight. But here's where things start to shift. By the 1980s, the haulage world was changing fast. European manufacturers were flooding in with high-tech, high-comfort cabs. The likes of DAF, MAN, and Volvo were starting to dominate big fleet contracts. And for a small firm like ERF, that was a problem. Even though they were still building tough kit, the market was moving towards integrated manufacturing, building your own engines, own chassis, own gearboxes, and ERF's mix and match approach was starting to feel a bit outdated. Still, they fought on. They introduced the E-Series, probably the most iconic ERF model of all. The EC cab came with updated styling, air suspension, better aerodynamics, and even some proper driver comforts. For many British hauliers, the ERF ECX was the last of the real British-built motors, rugged but refined, tough but thoughtful. You could take it on a week-long Scottish run, park it at a truck stop in Carlisle, and still get nods from other drivers. But by the mid-1990s, it was getting harder to keep up. New emission standards, rising material costs, and a more globalized trucking market put massive pressure on ERF's bottom line. They didn't have the deep pockets of their European rivals, they didn't have the production scale, and suddenly, that old-school charm wasn't enough to keep the lights on. That's when the buyout started. In 1996, Canadian giant Western Star swooped in, promising investment, growth, expansion. But it didn't last. Just 5 years later, in 2000, ERF was sold again, this time to MAN, the German powerhouse. And that really was the beginning of the end, because under MAN, ERF slowly stopped being ERF. The badge remained, but the trucks underneath were now MAN chassis with a different grille. The Cheshire-built soul had faded. Loyal customers noticed, and as the years passed, the orders dried up. By the early 2000s, the handwriting was already on the wall. Under MAN's ownership, ERF went from being a true British manufacturer to more of a badge-engineered brand. Sure, the name still had weight, especially with loyal British hauliers, but the lorries were no longer built in the same spirit. The soul was slowly being squeezed out and drivers could feel it. The first big blow came in the form of the ECX. Though it wore the ERF name, underneath it was all MANTGA. From the cab structure to the engine and electronics. It was a competent truck, no doubt, but it didn't feel like an ERF. The ruggedness, the modular simplicity, the no-nonsense vibe, all gone. For the veterans who'd cut their teeth on EC11s and E14s, it just felt hollow. And when a brand loses its emotional connection with its audience, things can go south quickly. Meanwhile, in the background, ERF's Middlewich factory, once a proud symbol of British engineering, was running at low capacity. Production was winding down, and whispers started circulating about closure. To make matters worse, a scandal erupted involving fraudulent accounting practices that had allegedly occurred under Western Star's ownership, just before the sale to MAN. MAN took ERF to court over it, alleging they'd been misled during the acquisition. The lawsuit didn't help morale. It didn't help public image either. In 2002, the worst fears were confirmed. MAN announced it would be closing the ERF plant in Middlewich and consolidating production into its facilities in Munich. A handful of staff were retained, mostly in parts and service, but for the bulk of ERF's workforce, men and women who dedicated their lives to British trucking, it was the end of the road. The closure was quiet, no grand headlines, just another great British name quietly shuffled out the back door. And so, just like that, a company that had once battled it out on the global stage, that had survived world wars, recessions, and changing markets, was reduced to a badge on someone else's grill. But the story doesn't end there. See, ERF might have vanished from the production line, but it never disappeared from the roads, or from the memories of those who drove them. Even today, you'll find EC11s still pulling trailers up the M62. Enthusiasts and preservationists have kept the brand alive in rallies, truck shows, and YouTube videos. Some hauliers even keep a restored EC14 or B series in the yard, not as decoration, but as a reminder of what real lorries used to be. There's something about the way an ERF handled the road, the visibility, the gearbox, the growl of a Cummins diesel in the morning frost. These trucks didn't rely on fancy tech, they relied on the driver. And for those who came up through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, that was something special. The other thing that sets ERF apart in people's memories is how personal the brand felt. Unlike other big-name companies, ERF was small enough that if you rang up with an issue, you might end up speaking to someone who built your cab. If you needed a part, they'd do their best to sort it. That kind of care is rare, and it leaves a mark. In hindsight, ERF's downfall wasn't due to bad trucks, it was timing. The market changed, the world got faster, bigger, more corporate. The very things that made ERF special, its independence, its bespoke builds, its tight-knit workforce, became liabilities in a market that now favored economies of scale and global supply chains. But that doesn't mean it failed, because for nearly 70 years, ERF punched well above its weight. It gave Britain a homegrown alternative to the continental giants. It trained generations of drivers. It moved goods, built cities, and kept the country ticking, quietly, reliably, and with pride. And for that reason alone, it's not forgotten. It's remembered in the rumble of a well-kept ECX still pulling a low loader. It's remembered in the collector's yards, in truck shows across the UK, in the old diesel scent that lingers in a 30-year-old cab. It's remembered in conversations between drivers, swapping stories of hauls gone wrong and nights slept in laybys, engine humming beside them like a trusted mate. So while ERF may no longer be on the production line, it's not gone. Not really. It lives on, in steel, in memories, and in a certain British stubbornness that refuses to let it fade. That's the mark of a proper legacy. One you don't need chrome or slogans to prove, just a square badge and a road worth driving.